Good morning, everyone. We're here for episode 5 of TechXchange, and with us, we have some great guests to talk about blockchain and other disruptive technologies. So, we have with us, firstly, Professor James Cooper. He's a professor of law and a director of international legal studies at the California Western School of Law in San Diego, California. He is also a research fellow here at the Singapore University of Social Sciences. He has extensive experiences in areas like blockchain and other emerging technologies. And so we're really excited to have him here for this topic today. We also have Dr. Jonathan Pan. He is the Chief of Disruptive Technologies Office here at HTX. And finally, we have Director Lim from the Digital and Information Forensics team, COE, here at HTX as well. So they work with some really exciting new technologies and quite things that are quite complex and difficult to work on. So I'm hoping that today they can help us really understand how these technologies are disrupting areas with the help of things like blockchain and how they fall into things like regulation and our legal landscape. Yeah. So with that, let's get started on today's podcast, and let's start with Professor Cooper. So Professor Cooper, you've had a very interesting journey in the many different types of disruption that came, and then you finally come into the blockchain space. Let's just start by maybe sharing a bit of that journey and what led you up to blockchain and what that has been like.
Thanks so much for asking, Arka, and hello to my fellow panelists, Director Lim and to Dr. John. Thank you both for joining me. It's an honor to be with all of you. Arka, to answer your question directly, I started off as a teenage pirate. Who knew I'd become an IP lawyer and then eventually a member of the U.S. delegation to the World Intellectual Property Organization. But the truth is, I started when I was 14 and 15 years old with a silk screen in my basement, and I made concert T-shirts and concert headbands for Olivia Newton-John and David Bowie and Queen. And normally I would show you some of them and do a little fashion show, but we don't have a lot of time here today. But fast forward a couple of years, and in between law school and going back to the academy to teach, I ended up, through a variety of reasons, to be a photographer for Marie Claire magazine, the French fashion and women's magazine. And lo and behold, I did a story for them for the British publication. They got published, and a couple of months later, I got a phone call. I was in New York, and I got a phone call from a woman who would become my Italian agent, and she said that El Corriere della Sera, the Milan-based newspaper, had published my photographs with neither my right of paternity, being the photographs were from me, so those droit moral, you say in French, the moral rights had been violated, and no payment. And I hadn't sold the worldwide rights to Mary Claire. So, hell hath no fury like an IP lawyer spurned. The fact that I had actually gone to law school in Italy for a year on a fellowship at the Universidad degli Studi di Siena just added a little bit extra. So it was icing on the cake. So I ended up suing the newspaper for 8 million lira, which is like $4. No, it was $8,000 at the time, Canadian. And we settled for 4, and my agent got $1,000, and I got 3,000 Canadian, which I don't know, was about 2,500 or 2,200 US at the time. And had they only bought the rights, they would have saved themselves some legal fees, and it would have only cost them $500, which was what I was selling the rights for. It's a very long way of saying that I was a pirate, then I was a victim of IP violations, and then I ended up doing consulting work as a contractor for 20 plus years for the US and other governments in Latin America and elsewhere to help promote intellectual property rights around the world. And I took a detour. I worked at the world's largest law firm for a while. There was one in every country. It's like a McDonald's kind of thing. And I understood IP. I understood we had clients like Hugo Boss and Estee Lauder and Levi's. So I really came to understand IP over the years as both so important for the little person, i.e. my pirated illicit concert t-shirt business, but also for the big corporations. And the amount of innovations and the R&D that goes into this work is necessary to protect all the intellectual property and to ensure that there are the rightful revenue streams that come from being so inventive. So I began to understand that. And then over time, with my work in Latin America, to make a really long story short, I saw the work that that the pirates were doing, and they were working with transnational criminal organizations. And same thing with terrorist groups, using intellectual property, pirated or counterfeit medicine or Hollywood products or any number of consumer goods that were being counterfeited and being sold, and the money was going to not only transnational criminal organizations and mafia type organizations, but to terrorist groups as well. So I was involved with the U.S. government for many years, helping them develop a strategy and executing that strategy in the Triple Frontier area between Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, where there's a lot of intellectual property piracy. So there's a very long way, Arca, of sort of explaining my creative world has always been as a photographer. I was a filmmaker for the BBC and a number of other the History Channel, and I still make documentary films. But I really approach blockchain as a student of intellectual property and the importance of protecting and promoting innovation, but also in terms of protecting the creative industry. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, I'm an artist whose whose medium is the rule of law, as pretentious as that sounds.
Huh. Well, that's quite an interesting take, because I think many people in blockchain are really creative, and it's attracting a lot of creative talent right now. And so I think it's important, as with any type of creation, to protect that, to allow the people who create it to actually go ahead and benefit from it, rather than have it be stolen, essentially.
I was going to say, and as a lawyer, too often we say no when we should be saying yes. And the lawyers are brought in when there's a problem, after there's a problem. And so if I leave anybody with any kind of message, the first lesson or life lesson or best practice I want to leave is you got to talk to your lawyers early in the process, rather than after the fact. It will help. Don't do AI as an example, as another disruptive industry that's got a lot of ethical challenges, and then figure out later what the privacy rights of kids were. Oh, we should have dealt with that, or we should have thought about. That's you need a resident ethicist or a resident jurist to come in to organizations and do an audit to make sure that what you're working on is not skirting the rules, and that as the liability of a company and its officers could be at risk, because you don't want to be involved in violating people's rights, knowingly or unknowingly.
So, Prof, I think this is really interesting because you shared your experience being a little bit of a pirate and an entrepreneur of sorts with the t-shirts. So, are you saying that as a content creator, we should actually engage the legal fraternity on the onset, even at the start when you're creating content itself?
Arm in arm. Absolutely. Because you don't want to have to backtrack to do all this work, to do all this code, and then figure out, oh God, we've got an engineer from the People's Republic. When we file, we have to file there first, and don't file in India. But you know what? Maybe you have to file. Every jurisdiction has a different way of filing a patent. And then there's the patent cooperation treaty. So in some places where you file and then pay an extra fee, you can file in other places. So you want to really understand your intellectual property is the asset you want to protect most. That's your golden goose. And so I know that sounds odd. You want to be in your creative mode, and you don't want like a lawyer standing right beside you, and you have to ask her or them, can I do this? And their answer is always going to be, let me go research it, because the work that you're all doing is so inventive. I always joke here in the U.S. where I live and where I teach. The founding fathers didn't think about cryogenic freezing of women's eggs, or online gambling, or any of the other major challenges that we have to deal with today. Even, and we'll talk about it later, I hope, the metaverse. Whose rules? Where do you go to court for that? How do you enforce your rights? So these are the sorts of questions, and especially in a jurisdiction like Singapore, that has reinvented itself and really, really led so many spaces, including blockchain, being the regulatory sandbox, being the place the foundation's set up. It's a huge opportunity for Singapore, because you want to be the place where capital is fomented, where you're not just a place where shipping and the containers come in, you reorganize them, you send them back out. Singapore so strategically, brilliantly placed itself on the cusp of this next wave and you don't need to be a big GDP. You can be a significantly deployed GDP. And I really appreciate the work that the government does in Singapore. It's not an easy, we're very critical in the academy, but it's not easy to balance things like investor protection, but also to enable the future of capital formation to lead that space, so that people, when the entrepreneurs come, they come to your jurisdiction. You want them to come because it's a better place to do business and a more enlightened place, not because the regulations are lower. You don't want to be like whatever clothing company opening up in whatever developing country. I'm not going to name anybody I don't want to embarrass anybody, but we all know who the usual suspects are. You don't want to be accused of social dumping, taking advantage of lax environmental or other regulatory rules, labor rules, in exchange to extract more surplus value from the worker. That's not cool.
If I may, just expanding on what you just talked about. You mentioned about metaverse and how it comes into play. In fact, the earlier question about how you got into blockchain, I guess the whole content creation and the value chain that goes up the stream has to be, in a way, there needs to be a means to have the legal means to carry it through in terms of protecting your IP. And I figured that you're going to narrow down towards the blockchain being an enabler of sorts to allow such things to happen.
Absolutely, and drive down the cost of all transactions in a perfect world. From your mouth to God's ears, John. What we're thinking about is, and what we're all trying to build, some of us to greater success than others, at least the ones who aren't the nefarious actors, the pump and dumpsters, the ones who are committing all these fraudulent situations where investors lose their money. The true pioneers are trying to build a Web 3.0 wherein you don't need an intermediary. We've always had this trouble with trust. That's why we rely on banks or Google or brokers of information to help us develop those relationships and to act as intermediary. If you can get rid of those couple of percentage points in the transaction, you can be much more competitive. And you can drive down the cost. Not everybody can afford a high-powered, big shot lawyer, but they can certainly get a smart contract coded that hopefully is coded correctly. and because let's be honest, they aren't all. A majority of them are, but there's still some kinks you got to work out. But not every contract. Yeah, but so now you don't have to go to court if you borrow money to buy a car and you don't make the payment on your car loan. And your software doesn't work. And guess what? You can't turn on the car. You don't need to repossess. You don't have to go to court. It's just in the smart contract that goes, if everything's coded and is properly seamless, then you get those sorts of transactions. Or you have goods coming from Singapore to the US and they don't clear customs under the free trade agreement they've got 48 hours, I think, under the free trade agreement to get the paperwork. And if they don't, it's got to be cleared. That stuff can all be done through, not even through bills of lading, but through blockchain. And so how do you use it for all those exciting projects, from land titling for developing countries, for food security, so that you know where the ship that took your fish is not putting antibiotics in it or hormone, whatever, that you can go from boat to table and know the provenance of your food, that it can be used for democracy and direct democracy. You can use it for things like DAOs, for creative ways that corporate governance can be done across borders. They don't require expensive boards of trust of director meetings and minute books to be kept, that there are other ways to finally free up the internet as it was meant to be, to move from 2.0 to 3.0.
I think there were a lot of really a lot of interesting points there. I wish we could go into all of them. About blockchain, you mentioned it as towards the end, about a way for all of this to enable better forms of governance, be it like direct democracy or even like corporate governance structures. But keeping that in mind, right, let's look back at the history of blockchain a bit and how it's developed. So a lot of early proponents of blockchain tech were actually users who wanted to be part of a system that wasn't so strictly regulated, let's put it that way. And that could be in terms of financial surveillance or inflationary economics or ownership of assets. And blockchain, or initially early forms of cryptocurrencies especially, came up as a way to support these visions that people had. Now, the thing is, as blockchain became as big as it is, it's normal that your everyday investors and people will get in, and that means more protection is needed, and hence the government has to step in to help protect those who may not be fully informed about what they're doing. And there are increasing number of steps and processes that governments are taking, be it central bank digital currencies or blockchain laws, that they're putting in place to help protect these investors. But that rift is widening between those ideological purists who were originally there for what blockchain originally stood for. As a lawyer, how would you see all these different sides proceeding, hopefully peacefully, and how can these clashes, these ideological clashes, be managed? We need both the protection but also the innovation. How do you see that kind of unraveling?
It's a great question, Arka, and and there's no one way of doing it, and each of us come to it, and each government comes to it with different ideas. But the thing is, the people, as you rightfully point out, the people who invented this stuff weren't about the sovereign state or the governments that represent those sovereign states. They were about decentralization. They didn't trust authorities. They thought we could move around trust and be more horizontal in our approaches as opposed to vertical with the social contract and with the Leviathan above us. That's the dance. That's the tension that we're now facing. So I'm going to try and unpack a couple of different things that you said and then try to put a new spin on it for all of us. But my first response always is, look, it's inevitably the big banks. If there's money to be made, legacy institutions, I love that expression, legacy institutions, old school Eurocentric, and not even Eurocentric, but banks are out there to make money. Financial houses are out there to make money. If there's arbitrage, if there's a way to make money, they're going to make money. That's what they do. That's why they're there. They're not there to do good. They're there to do well. So the fact that a bunch of banks or Goldman Sachs or VCs are getting in on this says that there must be something here, or they've drunk the Kool-Aid as well. But that, listen, they're going to try to make it centralized, just like, and not only the banks, but also governments, the state apparatus. Look what the People's Republic of China has done over the last couple of years. They've invented their own central bank digital currency under the radar. They've been working on this from 2014, 2015. It only took until 2019 when David Marcus, VP of Facebook at the time, now Meta, and Mark Zuckerberg appeared before a congressional hearing 2 different times. And they said, look, if you don't let us at Facebook build the Libra, which was what they were calling their basket of currencies that was going to be tied to. If you don't let us do this, the Chinese are going to eat our lunch for us. And so the People's Republic, the people went, oh my God, we got to move fast. So next thing you know, a couple of months later, they got Blockchain Day on October 24th, and they've got right envelope testing, and they're rolling it out slowly, the DCP, and it's centralized. And at the same time, they're saying no more Bitcoin. Stop Bitcoin miners. No, it's illegal here. We mean it. Oh, and then 6 months, no, we really mean it. And they sort of meant it. They weren't sure. They were still, but then they meant it last year. And then everybody left. And those ASICs machines were super cheap, if you remember, for a little bit, until the United States by default became the major miner of Bitcoin. My point being that these are geopolitical things too. So the centralization to decentralization argument and the what the People's Republic is doing and what the United States is not yet doing but should be doing with the digital dollar, and what the Monetary Authority of Singapore is experimenting with, and there are the Marshall Islands. There's dozens of these projects. Some of them will work, some of them won't. But the point is, we're still in that test phase. If for the U.S. dollar to continue its dominance as the global reserve currency, it would behoove them to get a hold of blockchain, get a hold of central bank digital currency technology, and figure out the best way to do this, because this is where it's all going. So you can sit there with your fax machine and the thermal paper is eventually disappearing. You can see the ink sort of drying as we go. We're there, kids. So it's time. So that's the second tension. And the last tension is what the originators, Arka, you were talking about. They were cypherpunks. They were libertarians. They didn't trust government. So a lot of them are just disappointed and jaded that yet another technology that was meant for good to finally liberate humanity has been eaten up by, pick your bad guy here, SOEs, state-owned enterprises from the People's Republic, or big tech from Silicon Valley, or whatever cabal, mysterious conspiracy theory you want to go with. Your choice. Point is, it's out of the bag, and there's new kinds of digital assets being developed, and regulators are caught flat-footed domestically in how to deal with the scams of the ICOs and so forth. But they're also, the regulators are caught flat-footed at the meta level, no pun intended with meta being Facebook, but at the global the supranational level, which is, there's a geopolitical struggle here. It's connected to One Belt One Road. It's connected to Made in China 2025 policy, and it should be connected to all things that the United States are doing. And it's time we got our asses in gear and started working on this a little bit harder.
Yeah, so maybe I'll chime in here, right? I represent more or less the law enforcement view because a lot of my work is to support law enforcement in trying to catch the bad guy. With all this decentralization and all that, even when it's the big bad guys doing, at least we still know who to go after, right? You can haul Facebook Zuckerberg up in front of Congress, you can question him, make him look really uncomfortable, but at least know that there's some form of way you can take people to task for it, right? But if in a truly decentralized, if it really works out there, then if something goes wrong, who do you go after, and how do we operate in that kind of world?
It's especially given that every, I don't have to tell you this, you're law enforcement. Every rule has an underlying norm that could be based in the Bible or based on your basic law or based on your constitution or based on your colonial experience. Every country's got it differently, but it's also there are norms, there are rules, and most importantly, to your point, there are institutions, and the institutions of enforcement, because laws are they're not good if they're, the legal system doesn't work if there's no enforcement. In a consistent, transparent, equal way. You're absolutely right. You're being asked to fight the bad guys who don't have to go to your parliament and ask for a congressional appropriation every year for your budget. Bad guy in another country he just throws money at the problem and makes it go away, right? You're up against, well, we got to do this. We have a constitution. There's a bunch of principles that we have to follow. There's due process. There's a lot of these legal niceties or legal fictions that exist in modern liberal democracies, and rightfully so. But, that's the difficult balance that everyone in liberal democracy today has to, you're fighting against bad guys, and you're fighting against bad guys who use all the great things that are resultants from our innovations against us, whether it's open markets, online trading, misinformation, cyber warfare, all that stuff. They're using all the great tools of modern society to make our lives more difficult. My heart goes out to you, because Director Lim, because it's not an easy thing. And again, Singapore is I think leading a lot of the industrialized North, if you will, or developing world, by being able to balance those things in a pluralistic society with its own challenges in a pandemic.
I believe, Professor Cooper, you bring up a very interesting point, and actually, Director Lim, I would like a bit more input from you on this. Professor Cooper says that a lot of the bad guys use the tech that we make, but for those who tuned in to the cloud panel during our TechX summit, they might have heard one of our panelists also say that a lot of technologies were originally used by the bad guys, which we moved on to use later as part of DIF. Is this something you experience, like things, be it blockchain or other open source technology, which you can use to kind of counteract what evil parties are doing?
Well, I think the point is that the technology is neutral, right? So it's really how you take advantage of it. Just because the bad guys are quicker, faster, don't have to ask for budget, and they can take advantage of it faster, doesn't mean that we can't do the same eventually, right? So it's not that we are copying them. We are just probably a step behind sometimes due to having to go through layers and layers of approval, right? The bureaucracy, the red tape. But yeah, it's the same advantages that technology affords them. Similarly, we can take advantage of those and come in a bit later, maybe like Apple, right? You always wait and see, and then after you see, okay, that's how people are using, right? But let me come in at this perfect angle, and I then can dominate the market. So I can then use the technology to do it in a way that can beat all the early adopters as well. So yeah, there's no real advantage or disadvantage to say whether you're first, right? Lots of the people who are first, yeah, me, no, they are no longer here. Whereas those that came in a bit later took some time to understand the technology before they come in. Maybe they do actually end up doing better.
I guess ultimately it's always a cat and mouse game, and hopefully we're a good enough cat.
Yeah, but on top of that, you also have sometimes the best tech doesn't win. That the consumer opts for the worst tech. So if you think of Sony Betamax versus VHS. So VHS won.
They don't care about specs, right? You can have wow, right? This whole list of solid technical specification, but that's not gonna win the consumer, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. But the world is made up of these beauty contests. These are parts of national industrial policy, whether it's GSM or CDMA for your telecom, or Crest versus Colgate for your toothpaste. There are standards out there.
So, Prof. Cooper mentioned about potentially how the bad guys could actually exploit the systems, or depending different groups exploiting it. Lim mentioned about the fact that the law enforcement could actually exploit this technology. But the other point, perhaps a community that we shouldn't miss out are the consumers themselves, which I think Prof. Alluded to. Because if you were to exploit the potential benefits from blockchain itself being immutable, etc., it opens up an opportunity to even enable safe transactions of sorts. A case in point, perhaps maybe in NFT and the likes, where I've seen it where folks who couldn't monetize their creativeness. I guess your shirts could have made a difference if NFT existed then.
But not if you had legal advice.
Yeah, I don't know how I charge myself going back in time. That's probably unethical, but we'll figure that out.
But I guess there's another view, right? Because there's another group which is a larger group, which is the community itself. The content creators could actually make use of these technology, and then serve its own good in this case.
Absolutely, and what you're seeing with law enforcement, certainly over here with some of the recent, the government has been able to. And investigators have been able to get hold of digital assets enlarged into the billions. And that's a big, we're starting to see finally the white hat hackers they've been there all along. You've been working with them directly all along, people using their super skills for good. And that's awesome. And I think we're seeing that's certainly a growing industry, cybersecurity. We're seeing the universities, whether it's Singapore University of Social Science or the Singapore Management University. You're seeing it in all over the States. You're seeing cybersecurity issues increasingly being careers that students want to follow. And I applaud that, because that's a huge growth area. And again, where very sophisticated city-states like Singapore can make a real difference. What I was going to say about NFTs, though, is like blockchain or crypto generally, most of the conversation has been about the outrageous, the 6 outrageous stories, or the billions of dollars that are sold, and then the stock is worth, and then the coin is worth nothing. These sorts of the Doge coins and the other rides of things that go up and down based on certain tweets and so forth. That's like 5% of and I'm making that number up. 80% of statistics are made up, including that one, the 80% one. But what I'm trying to say is the fraudulent activities that are going on, the no goodniks that are committing scams, that's a small percentage of the overall projects. And it sucks up, though, 95% of the press. And I would just love to come to a time when we get rid of all those outliers and we get rid of all those bad actors through your hard work and the hard work of others. And we start to liberate the technology and let it be used for, and empower it to be used for what it's meant to be used for, not to make Eastern European gangsters richer or to help obfuscate the provenance of your ill-gotten gains through other illegal means. No. It's about land titling and making it easier for people who are unbanked to get access to government services. Here's something new. It's going to reinforce the social contract, not rip it apart.
I think that was a really good point. I feel like as being a person within the blockchain community here, I see a lot of my fellow peers also very disheartened by the fact that marketing is such an important part of their projects, and most of them are engineers, and they really dislike the fact that they have to spend so much time on making it sound cool when they actually know it's really cool underneath. But so I feel that pain. I feel that disheartenment. But I believe that eventually, as with the .com bubble in the early 2000s, we have to expect that the best tech will survive, be useful, and will carry on to live a long life.
And may I make a friendly amendment, Arca, and be regulated.
Be regulated.
You can't be a $3 trillion business. So you say maybe it's 1.5. It can't be worth trillions of dollars. We'll just say that, and not expect to get regulated. Sorry. You're gonna have people who don't like your industry. You're gonna have people who really like your industry. You're gonna have people that buy people who to really like your industry in forms of lobbying. You're gonna see, as we're seeing right now, an amazing amount of tech pioneers and Bitcoin millionaires now running for Congress. And I support that in some senses, not that more rich people should buy their seats in Congress, but that people who understand the technology should be making the rules, rather than have a regulatory capture kind of environment where the people that are the industries that are attempting to be regulated by the regulators are being staffed by former lobbyists and other congressional people, and vice versa. That revolving door, that won't work. But there should be ethics. So when we were talking, Arca, earlier about what is this all smoke and mirrors, and to your point about your friends, shouldn't the technology not just solve a problem, but solve a problem we need to be solved? That to me is the most exciting one, the one that doesn't take out small mom and pop investors' savings. That's one. What are the tech I like? What's the tech I like? One that doesn't one that's developed with ethical parameters, one that transcends generations, that understand that you have to have both content and process. It can't just be I'm going to make all the video machines, but I'm also going to make some of the content, and then understand you need walls between some of those activities. And then finally, content technology that won't change opinion. How about something that's like opinion neutral, that's not going to foment misinformation, but again, like what Director Lim was saying earlier, it's got to be politically neutral.
All right, Professor Cooper. So far we had quite a few discussions on blockchain specifically, and the challenges and opportunities it holds. But I think that's part of a larger theme, which is a disruptive technologies, disruptive and innovation in general. We see a lot of it nowadays, and we have seen a lot of it through time, right? A lot of new trends and ideas do appear very disruptive when they start out, especially. And there's the whole hype cycle behind it. But they either get watered down to something more palatable for the status quo, an example being something like biotech experimentation, or perhaps they're just too early for their time. So companies like Microsoft created a tablet before the iPad came out, but they just didn't make it. And we had a brief discussion on that. Is it the best tech, or is it like really just the tech that users prefer more? So with all that in mind, having been someone in the space for a while, seen a lot of disruptive, new companies, new ideas come up, how do you tell what has lasting power, and perhaps what is too early for its time, and what is ultimately just smoke and mirrors?
It's a great question, Arca. I approach this as I did legal reform in Latin America for more than 20 years. And so there's certain ideas or certain disruptive, I didn't know we called it disruption back then, by the way, but it's disruptive technology, moving from the inquisitorial system of criminal procedure to the adversarial system. So moving from a closed, transparent way based on the Spanish Inquisition, not exactly the hallmark of modernism or enlightenment, to something closer to what you do in Singapore, what we do in Canada, the United States, with burden of proof and juries and balance of probabilities when it comes to civil cases. But to move systems of legal procedure, like moving technologies, you have to have a really good idea, and it has to be infused by certain norms, that transparency or due process, or the right to protect the accused, or the right of making a system that is based on equity and participation and transparency. So to me, it's the big ideas that will last. Earlier, Director Lim was talking about not necessarily being the first, and how that sometimes not being the first mover is an advantage. And if you think about Google, people don't use Lycos as a search engine anymore. People don't use a Navigator. I had to download Chrome today to do this call with you. Thanks a lot, guys. But point I'm trying to make is the players that last a long time. You'll see the same people on the way up as you do on the way down. The ones who make the biggest impact, to me, at least over 2 decades of doing this kind of work in disruption, are the people who are there for the test of time, not the flash in the pans. Which goes to my earlier point of all these no good nicks and pump and dumpsters in the ICO airdrop, and you see a ton of it in Singapore, as we do all around the world. There's a lot of chicanery. And as a result, people are going to lose money. Some are sophisticated investors. I don't feel so badly for them, but for the mom and pop investor, I certainly feel badly for him. And so the question is, who's funding this research? What are their, if it's to make a quick buck or to have a big show at a cryptocurrency conference and then quickly leave, those aren't the people who are going to last, and those aren't the people who are going to do things by the rules. So I think longevity is important. I think people who have a lot of skin in the game, who stay in the game, is important, and professionalism. Because if you truly believe in this as a liberating technology, blockchain, which I do, then you're going to be doing it 6 years from now, not just the last 6 months and another 6 months, and then score big and exit, because those people are going to find something else, some other snake oil. But for the rest of us who want to make the world a better place, for the majority of us who want to use this technology to help liberate humanity and get us to all reach our greatest human potential, and to reduce racism, to increase economic prosperity, to promote ESG goals, all those things, from an educational, a spiritual point of view, we need to do better. And unfortunately, the ones who have made the biggest noise in blockchain are the ones who are getting the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, notices of action and enforcement actions against them. The ones who are there, they don't have to make a trillion times their multiples. There's healthy profits to be enjoyed. In other words, you can do well and good at the same time. So I don't. If it seems too good to be true, Arca, it probably is. That's my investment philosophy.
Yeah, unfortunately, that doesn't really fly, right? Again, from the law enforcement point of view, that's what gets people in. The issue with what we're facing today is that there's also a deficit of trust, right? So even though you say I'm a professional, you're a professor and all that, just because you say so, not everyone is going to tell. Even though you have a great body of work, been in this field for the last 6 years, or even before people know it was hot and sexy, but a lot of people are still not going to trust you, right? They're still going to fall for those things, and then of course after that, lament and come to us, and then we try our best and to catch the bad guys again, and then it's a vicious cycle. I'm just thinking, how can we break out of this situation that we are in today?
I think we have to get the media to help us. Number one. Number two, education. If it all seems too good to be true, it is too good to be true. No one's going to make 50% of their money in a year. Come on. Who in the right? So yeah, some people will, and those are the people who are usually early on and get out before the whole thing collapses. In the case of a Ponzi scheme or like pyramid schemes. So people are greedy, and a fool and her money are soon parted. So again, if it seems to be too good to be true, then it probably is. And I've just seen, I remember May of 2018, the Wall Street Journal did an article. They reviewed 1,451 different white papers, 1451. And I think the number was 271 had parts that were missing, parts that had been cribbed from stolen from other, copied and pasted, and design teams that didn't exist. And my answer to that when I got interviewed was 271 out of 1451. Is that all? Not, oh my, that's a lot of fraud. Like, that's it? I would have thought it was way more. And Director Liz laughed because it's just, and this is a crazy industry, which is why we need some adults to come in, bringing in those big banks, bringing in some of the people that are going to hurt the original intention because they want to centralize it, or they want rules, or they want to know their client or their customer, KYC, and they want to engage in anti-money laundering rules because it's the law. Those are the people you want to play with. The people that are they're crossing the T's and dotting the I's. Some fly-by-night, a guy in a fancy suit named Vladimir at a show with a pretty girl in his arm. That's not where you want to put your money. So it doesn't take a whole lot of brain surgery to get to this stage. But again, we live in weird times, and the same thing with the metaverse. People are because they just add the word metaverse to whatever they're doing, and they're going to get the meetings now because everybody wants in on the metaverse. Just like in 2017, Long Island Iced Tea Company added the word blockchain to their name, and their stock went up by 3 in a matter of a few weeks. Do you really want? That's great for the shareholder, but that's not the organizing principle. That's not how I want this industry to work. If it's truly meant to work the way it's meant to work, and Web3 can do what we all hope it can, then we got to have better rules and better guardrails.
That was a very interesting point you brought up, because I think I read some research about how the top 500 companies in the US, in their earnings calls, the most recent ones, more than 50% of them had the word metaverse inside it. Yeah, it's just good marketing, right? I think that actually takes me to next question. But for this one, I actually like to ask Dr. Pan for your opinion first.
All right.
So we know that you work on a lot of disruptive tech, and a lot of it is very foundational and fundamental. So it's not like going out to the public immediately. But I think that brings to question something that we've been discussing, the less flashy side of disruption, which is the failure, right? When it doesn't work out, how do you kind of know when it's not going to work out? When do you maybe cut your losses, or how do you deal with the fact that there are even losses after you've put in so much time into this technology you really believed in, really put in a lot of time into? How do you go about doing that?
Okay. Well, I think, in my personal opinion, failure is part and parcel of the equation itself, if I may use the word loosely. In a way, because it's actually through the failures that you sort of figure out what works and what doesn't work. And so I do think that failure actually becomes part of the tree structure, if I may draw an analogy, that you will then grow into it. And so at the end of it, and again going back to what Prof. Cooper actually mentioned just now, it's actually the long run that we are working towards too. So it's going to be failures, and for sure there'll be failures that will go down certain ways. But we should figure out why it didn't work, perhaps maybe find better alternatives. So failure is not a bad thing, just to start off. To identify them, I think, I guess the short of it, again going with what Prof. Cooper said, so if everybody puts in blockchain or metaverse into their name, and then their stock price goes up, it's where we want to recognize the hype and not get into the hype cycle or the excitement for the wrong reasons, and to understand a little bit more of the technology itself, and that will bring us in a better route. But I think, again, going back to the point, it's going to be the long haul where we are leading towards too, and that's going to be key. And I think that's any disruptive technologies, whether it's in what form, what happens in the past, perhaps we should learn something from the history and then help us to navigate to the future. Yeah, so that's I hope it's not too philosophical,
no,
but
this and actually, Director Liang, I would like to ask you on a similar note, working on more close to the ground, do you experience, like, would you say that do you share a similar perspective to that?
Well, if you learn anything from history, is that nobody learns anything from history, right? So they even like we just talk about crimes, like scams, and all. They see, people are just bringing the same thing, but just in a different form. Everyone is greedy, right? 50%. Who doesn't want 50%? If all you have to do is just a couple of clicks on your mouse and send all your money over to this very flashy-looking website. We tend to like to deep dive on some of the technologies, right? Really understand the fundamentals and all that. But that doesn't apply to really the mass, the majority of consumers out there. You're able to put in the right buzzwords, have some flashy marketing, and go viral at the right moment. It's easy to get people just to put the money into you. So unfortunately, this is the world we live in, and from the enforcement point, and unfortunately means it's a lot of work. Education is a very long road, but we will continue to do that, and hopefully, through a podcast like this, right, it will also help to bring the message across.
And for the record, I'm going to be getting that money back from the Nigerian prince. He promised me. He's going to send me. I'm still waiting.
Any day now.
It's coming. It was so weird. I gave him my bank account number, and he was supposed to leave me money, but he took my money out. I don't get it.
You gotta give money to make money.
No, you gotta give me your Bitcoin wallet address. Your wallet address, not
the. Next time when he calls back, for the record, that did not happen. But I can't believe it happens to people we know.
Professor Cooper, I'd like to ask you a variant of that question, because being a lawyer who works with, say, startups and young founders who are really, really excited, but then you have to be the person to tell them no. How do you kind of see them and deal with failure or like rejection in this way? And maybe in a very, very quick way, what's the best advice you can give to people who are working on technology when they see it don't work out? When they see it not work out?
Well, my dad's in his 80s, and he always says, God bless him, he always says, you don't learn from your successes, you learn from your mistakes. And if you look at the successful entrepreneurs out there, and especially in big tech, they had several failures before they hit big. And these are cycles, and you have to understand that you're not going to hit a home run. And young people don't have the experience to know that sometimes you have to spend a little bit of time in the trenches, and it may not happen in your 20s and your 30s. Now, I got involved. I was on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in 2018, and a couple of kids came over to me at the Hard Rock Cafe. We were doing the One World Blockchain Alliance. I remember a couple of kids from the People's Republic came over to me. They were half my age, so two of them were my age together. The two 26-year-olds came up to me and they said, "We really liked what you said. Would you like to be a COO of our blockchain company?" And it's like, of course. Why? What's wrong with this picture? A guy who knows nothing about blockchain, a couple of engineers from the People's Republic, and hopefully some kosher money. What could possibly go wrong here? And it was the most amazing experience I've ever had. And we went through, we didn't have a product. So how do you tell the kids no when there's nothing to say no about? And at one point the company's worth a couple $100 million because bots are trading it. How do you explain that to, at the time, my 80-year-old father? And this is how I'm spending my sabbatical between law school jobs. And at any one time, you're trying to keep them out of jail for certainly immigration fraud, for sure potential corporate problems. Securities fraud, well, if you use the 1946 Securities Exchange Act, the Howey test from the Supreme Court decision, it's probably a security, not a utility, as much as we like to try to pretend it's a utility. If it's an investment contract and you're going to be making money on someone else's hard work, it's a security. Not a currency yet. The point is, what is it? So we go through this navel gazing experience, and I got to tell these 26-year-olds, you can't do this, or you can't say this, or we're not going to make a market by let's pay all our taxes and file our IP immediately. And because the only thing we're going to have is ideas at the end. So even if it's open source, you can still find ways to file. So it was. So the short answer to your question, Arka, is you've got to sit with the kids and tell them. They were such great mentors to me, and they were half my age. So the advice I give to people about tech, especially if they're older, is get a younger mentor. Do it the opposite of what we've been told, and try to find people from other cultures that can help you understand not only the new tech, but from a different culture and a different language, so that you're mixing so many things up. There's so much leapfrog technology and nonlinear learning. You're going to be out of your comfort zone forever, and that's exactly where the sweet spot is for innovation. I don't know if my colleagues would agree.
Yeah, it sounds good. That sounds like a good approach.
Just a fun like tidbit from I guess my peers of my age group. We also often think about like what are some of the biases we have having grown up sort of as millennials, and how can Gen Z kids kind of help us break those biases by not being tied down by that baggage. So I guess in a way it's kind of works its way down. I wonder who the Gen Z kids look to. Maybe, I don't know, people younger than them. I don't know, but I don't think they'd have much experience. But I think this cycle will sort of persist through time.
I think there's probably an app for that. For whatever you're talking about, there's going to be an app for that. In fact, if there isn't, there is just now.
Is that your IP?
Yes.
So
and some engineers just filed it. Sorry, we're a little late.
All right. So I think that was a really good conversation we had. I'd like to ask you one question, which I ask all our guests who come, and it's about technology in general. So other than your area of work, what are some other technological ideas, changes, trends that you see which you are excited about, other than blockchain as your area of work?
That's a great question, and thanks for asking that, Arka. I love anything that does not involve harvesting my data, predicting my next purchase, or relying on others for validation. I don't need people to like what I had for lunch. I had to like it. And so for me, the bespoke pharmaceutical world is a really interesting space where you're going to see tailored dosing. So if you know that a certain side effect is going to hurt you, and we know what part or how that interacts with your particular DNA or what genes you need to, or what, there's going to be a way so that everybody doesn't take the same statin for their cholesterol, or everybody doesn't take the same, prescribed pharmaceutical for the same ailment, because it's going to affect you differently. I think we're going to see a world of nanotechnology combined with these micro pills that are going to be specific to your ailments and your DNA. And I think that's very exciting. It's also dangerous, to go back to some elements of our earlier conversation, if it falls into the wrong hands. But I also believe that this kind of tailored or bespoke pharmaceutical world and microdosing, I think, is a really important technology that we'll have to do. And then other new forms of delivery. We were able in March of 2020, in a matter of weeks, to move most of our societies online to a world of digitization. It would have taken us decades. We did it in weeks to prepare. For the Legal Academy, which I've been part of for 25 plus years, for us to go online and teach on Zoom, that would have taken, I don't know how many faculty brown bag discussions and meetings and adjournments, and you're going to chair a meeting and I'm going to table a motion. You have a whole set of furniture at the end. It's a serious endeavor. And the fact that most of our societies were able to do it in a very graceful pivot, I think we need to congratulate ourselves, and our IT specialists are the most important people next to our clergy and our family members in the world. So really, certainly for your industries, and speaking to my colleagues on the couch there, this was a great experience. Unfortunately, it had to come at a time of a pandemic, but it, with great loss and great challenges, we are able to do great things collectively. So I think that for me, we live in a world, I was joking before about standards, about the clash of standards. I think we're going to have to start to figure that out too. So all these technologies that I'm excited about, we're going to have to figure out if it's the American Medical Records Protection, HIPAA, is it going to be Europe's GDPR, is it going to be Singapore's MIX? And it's an ongoing race or beauty contest among different kinds of standards, like GSM versus CDMA in the telecom world, or civil law or adversarial system of criminal procedure versus inquisitorial. We're going to live in a world of, is it their 5G or our 5G? Is it their AI or is it our AI? So anything that we're going to be using going forward has to have an ethical filter, some form of ethical guidelines. So I'm as you do projects going forward, I just always encourage folks to please don't forget the lawyers. Bringing them later is too late already. And get lawyers, and we need our lawyers to be more ready to say yes and here's how versus no, you can't do that. And so I think there's a little bit of for both of us. So I'm excited about these other technological changes, and I salute our IT specialists for helping birth our new era.
Thank you for that, Professor Cooper. So we're here for the bold segment of this podcast. So it's quite straightforward. We ask a question, and the panelists and our co-host today will pick out a persona from the bowl, and it will be either some person working in tech, or a kid, or maybe someone who's not even in any of these areas, and they will have to explain that answer to that person in terms that they would understand and be able to relate to. Yeah. So first, Prof. Cooper, I know you can't really pick this, so I'll be your proxy hand as you try and pick a persona over here. Yes. Say when and...
When?
Yes, all right. In perfect sync. The persona you have received is a healthcare worker. So the question for you is actually an interesting one. What is an ICO? How would you explain that to a person working in an area like healthcare?
In here in North America, when we're in the ICU, it's the intensive care unit. So that's different than an ICO, but I thought I'd try to combine the two. An ICO is an initial coin offering. This is when coins, digital assets of a company, are released, and it has been seen by the Securities and Exchange Commission and other securities regulators around the world as a form of an initial public offering of stocks. And when that happens, it brings about a series of compliance requirements and mechanisms for disclosure and transparency. Often companies in the digital space, in the blockchain space, in the crypto space, will have an ICO. Many of them haven't done the paperwork necessary to do a legal IPO, and they're seeing what their coin is not a security. They might not think it's a security, but the SEC or whatever securities regulators that exist in their specific jurisdiction may think otherwise.
I think a healthcare worker would wonder, like, they're under a lot of regulations, right? So they'd be like, is there a ICO equivalent for us to get in and, do our stuff without filling up so much paperwork? That would be.
The short answer is no. Short answer is no.
No. From a lawyer, no.
No. And healthcare workers have enough compliance. Let's not burden them with more securities issues. And let's just also take this opportunity to thank all our frontline healthcare workers in every country for all the hard work that they have done to keep us safe.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Cooper. Director Lim, maybe you can go next.
Okay. Oh.
What is that?
Oh, that's easy. A university student.
Ah, all right.
Right.
So the question for you.
I assume they're smart.
Let's hope so. we can call one of our interns. We can call one of our interns.
It could be SMU, right?
SUSS.
The question for you is, how would you go about catching a cyber criminal?
Well, first, right, you will have to understand that the cyber criminal obviously lives on the internet, in the cyber world, right? And as a university student, I'm sure you are well connected. You understand how it works. That's where all your games happen, right? And your investment happens as well today, and all your studying happens today as well, right? So maybe put in your context, right? How do you catch someone that is cheating during an online exam? So the answer is tough because of the way the technology works, right? Just because you see something on your screen doesn't mean it's real, doesn't mean it's happening at that time, and doesn't mean it hasn't been altered or tampered in any way. That's where, as enforcement, right, we have to try to locate the source. Where is it coming from? And what are technologies being used, so that we know what are all the possibilities of how this thing is happening. If you're lucky, right, it all traces to someone in your jurisdiction, in this case, right, in your university, right? But if it's someone from a rival university hacking you, then it's a bit tougher to go there and catch him. But to catch someone in your own university, that will be pretty easy, right? Because you just have to go summon the person, you have his details, and you get him. So that's for us. Someone in our country, we can catch them. But if they are in another country or another university, then obviously you got to liaise with the other university, and hopefully they are cooperative. And even better, you have some agreement with them. Then they will then send their student marching over to your university, right? And then you can then punish them accordingly to the rules of your university. So yeah, that's in a nutshell how you will catch someone.
Sounds intense. With I think with like the metaverse and all coming up, I wonder what metaverse criminals and all will look like. Will they have metaverse like ranches where they stay and hide?
Yeah, and then you have a meta jail, right? You got the jail in the metaverse, right? Prison, right?
I think that's called being shadow
You also
banned.
need a soundtrack. I felt like you needed some sort of 1970s cop show soundtrack.
All right, thank you for that, Derek. It was a very, very, very fun answer. All right.
Okay, so I should grab mine.
Yes.
Okay. Oh no. Okay. Wait, hold on. Okay.
All right. Okay, this one will be a tough one. It's the coffee shop uncle, because your question is actually about something we discussed today. Your question is, we discussed a lot about blockchain, and maybe you can tell us just a bit about, like, you can explain to the coffee shop uncle what are some maybe other things that they can see in their day-to-day lives, other concurrent trends, which can, effectively tie in with something like that seems so cool and abstract as blockchain.
Okay, that's a hard one. Just hard specifically
we're saving the best for last.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess to the uncle, or in this case, the gentleman in the coffee shop, he could in the future perhaps maybe buy his coffee using cryptocurrencies.
You already use PayLah, right? So it's not that far a reach.
It's true, but perhaps maybe his income source could come from what he creates in his own content, and he's monetizing it, and in a way he's actually buying things with it. So, and the other thing is that with the cryptocurrency, or in this case blockchain, the coffee that is consuming, we will know exactly where it's coming from, the coffee beans, and whether it's a good source. But I just like to add a little bit more to that. I think the other thing that potentially this uncle or this gentleman could get excited about it, not just for himself, but perhaps for every one of us, adopting the use of blockchain, is when blockchain fuses with sustainability as the narrative. Namely, how blockchain can be earth-friendly to nature, to the larger nature, and instead of consuming lots of power that it consumes today in the mining processes itself, this could actually be a new frontier that uncle could look forward to, and something for him to get excited for. So just while he's sipping his coffee, and his it is a good thing that he's thinking for his future, and the future goes ahead for you.
I think you brought up a very interesting point on the on like sourcing, right? Like looking at the places, all the places the coffee has been fairly sourced. That's a big thing that's emerging as a cultural trend as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of our well-known cryptocurrencies are moving towards more sustainable practices, right? In a sense, like from proof of work to like proof of stake, proof of history.
Yes.
And then I think that's a really interesting area that I think will touch everyone's kind of lives, because it brings down transaction costs.
Yeah.
It makes things more accessible and easy to use, and it's not as objectionable as the energy Bitcoin uses, right?
Yes.
So I think that was a really, really cool point. I think a lot of people will look forward to that. Everyday people who will be touched by these things.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. That was a really good answer. I think with that we have come to the end of today's session. I would really like to thank Professor Cooper for really participating and giving a lot of very, very exciting and fun insights, for being a fun guest to host, and also to to Director Lim and to Dr. Pan here for helping me kind of co-host, drive the conversation forward. I think it was a really good conversation. There were a lot of things we could have dived deeper into, but sadly time is a scarce resource, and we hope that we can maybe take this ahead in the future again, have more discussions on this on the TechXchange podcast. Also, please remember to subscribe to this channel and like and share this video. Share with your colleagues and with your friends who might be interested, or snippets of it. And with that, we'll see you in the next episode of the TechXchange podcast. Thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me.